All right, let's continue with our video lecture for unit number 5. Now we're looking at part number 3, dealing with nationalism and reformations and revolutions and the Enlightenment on one big PowerPoint. So the Enlightenment is going to be a big turning point, because it's going to bring to life, bring to fruition, bring to realization the revolutions and the rebellions against the old forms of governments, the old absolute monarchy type of governments that we see. And the Enlightenment is going to question these traditional beliefs about, government and the relationship between people and the states and the rulers. And the Enlightenment is going to be the inspiration for all the different revolutions that are going to take place in the Atlantic world, in North America, South America, and in Europe during this time period. Now we're going to see that there's going to be a whole bunch of new thinkers and philosophers who are going to come around and start applying new ways of thinking and understanding about humanity, about the economy and society and culture and everything else. And we're going to see, for example, people like Voltaire argue for religious freedom, and people like Rousseau argue about the social contract, where people should be able to have a say in government because they give their individual freedoms up to give power to the government, so the governments can protect those freedoms. We're going to see how Voltaire is going to argue for religious tolerance and the freedom of religion, saying that people should be able to practice whatever religion that they want. Now, these same intellectuals, these same philosophers or philosophers, they're going to, try to reduce the role of religion. Now, they are not going to be atheists. They're not going to be anti-religion, at least not all of them, but they're going to start supporting ideas like the separation of church and state, right? That religion shouldn't play a role in government, and that the government should not be forcing any religion on their people, that the people should be able to choose whatever religion that they want. And of course, we see this in the First Amendment of the United States Constitution and our Bill of Rights. We also see that there's going to be less emphasis on religion. In other words, we see this process called secularization, and we're going to see this in education. So instead of being, taught by priests and monks and nuns, which was the traditional way of educating people in Europe, we're going to see now professional teachers and professors and stuff like that working in schools and universities, right? Not necessarily people who are church members or church officials, like the clergy. And another example of the increasing kind of like negative view of religion is the popularity of deism, right? This belief that there is a creator God who kind of set the universe in motion, but really does not interact or answer people's prayers in day-to-day activities. And this creator God just kind of stands by and observes his creation from a distance. Enlightenment thinkers are also going to develop, besides religious ideas, they're going to develop political ideas, talking about the relationship between the people and their rights and the government. John Locke is going to be one of these political Enlightenment philosophers. His big famous idea is that we have unalienable natural rights granted by our Creator, including the right to life, liberty, and property, and that the government has no reason to take away or no power to take away these natural rights, unless, of course, you commit some type of crime. Now, another guy called Baron de Montesquieu, he's a French philosopher. He's going to be the one that comes up with this process, or this idea of separating the powers of the government into 3 different branches, and that these 3 different branches will serve as checks and balances against one another, therefore avoiding the creation of a tyrannical dictatorship type of government. So we see new political ideas, and again, here we see the 2 famous philosophers, John Locke and Baron de Montesquieu. There's a few others, but those are the main ones we need to worry about. Now, all these different philosophers are also going to question and challenge the current, or what was back then, the current social relationships. In other words, in the past, right, even though places like Britain and the Netherlands might have been some type of constitutional government, where people had some levels of representation in the government, the fact remained that most people who got to vote were the wealthy white males. So we see the movement towards a more universal suffrage, where all men, regardless of wealth, can vote. Now, of course, the flaw or the limitation of this is that women and others were denied from this right to vote until the 20th century. These same Enlightenment thinkers are going to question the morality of slavery and serfdom, and question that serfdom and slavery go against the beliefs and natural rights of life and liberty and freedom. And we're going to see, of course, the abolition movement, become a major movement that will bring an end to slavery in the Americas, and bring an end to serfdom in Russia. We're going to see an increased levels of representation in government. These are legislative bodies that are the members are voted by the people. All right, so for example, in the United States, we have our Congress, the House and the Senate. In Britain, they have the Parliament. In Japan, they're going to create the Diet, that's what it was called. And in Russia, remember, Russia's going to have those local elected officials called the Zemstovs, right, those city assemblies. So the point is that there's going to be more people able to vote and more representation of people's voices, of the people, in these new governments and reformed governments. And in addition to that, we're going to see increased access to public education. Now, we see that the creation of national communities, in other words, nationalism, is going to create this idea that people who share a language and a religion and social customs and live within a close proximity within a territory, that they should be able to create their own government, that they should have a state that represents their nation, their identity, their people. So sometimes we see the creation of nationalism unify people under a sense of commonality, a sense of common identity. And this is especially important in more diverse countries like, say, the United States, that has a very diverse population, yet they're all united. We are all united under the nationalist or under the patriotic belief of being an American. Moving forward here, American colonial subjects are going to rebel against the imperial states. So these are the revolutions that we've mentioned before, how the American Revolution here in the United States are going to rebel against the British. And these rebellions, right, the goal is to have a independent country, independent state. Right, the same thing is going to happen with Haiti. It's going to become independent after its success and independence from France. And all over South America, we're going to have the Creole revolutions, united against the Spanish imperial authorities. So again, here we see some of the maps dealing with the American Revolution. Remember, Britain controlled a big part of North America, including Canada and the United States. And eventually, after the Revolution, we see the creation of the United States on the eastern side of North America. Where are we? In Haiti, of course. Haiti is a tiny little, western half of the island of San Dominique or Santo Domingo or Hispaniola. And on the other side, of course, you have the Dominican Republic. But on this side, on Haiti, the famous leader Toussaint Louverture, he is going to lead the Haitians into creating the first republic, run by former slaves. It is the second republic in the Western Hemisphere, and it is the first country ever to completely abolish slavery. All over South America, we're going to have those Creole revolutions, Simón Bolívar being the great liberator of South America, along with San Martin, and keep in mind that these revolutions, of course, were more independence than actual revolutionary movements. Now, France, of course, is going to have its set of revolutions. The main one, of course, being the late 1700s, early 1800s, where we see, the rise against the absolute monarchy of King Louis XVI and his wife, Queen Marie Antoinette. We see that social inequality between the different estates, between the first and second estate, the nobles and the clergy, versus the commoners of the third estate, and that the symbolism of the political power, that absolute monarchy that we see in Versailles, becomes a symbol to rally the French revolutionaries against that social and political inequality, and Versailles again symbolized that. So remember, France is going to undergo its revolution, and remember, all the surrounding countries are going to try to invade France to stop this revolution from spreading or succeeding in France, or spreading throughout Europe. And of course, this is going to create the first nation state. The modern nation state of France is going to be formed, because the French people are going to stop looking at themselves as, being from Nantes or being from Bordeaux or from Orléans or from Paris, and they're going to start viewing themselves as French, and therefore unite themselves under the French banner, the French flag, and the French beliefs in liberty and other revolutionary movements. So this is a famous painting dealing with the French Revolution, and again, it is a widespread, it is a popular movement, right, where the mass majority of the people, the lower class, the third estate, is going to rise up and overthrow the government. Now, these Atlantic revolutions, again, they were applying and creating and putting into practice all the Enlightenment ideas and beliefs. And even though they had some levels of success, they still were flawed. They weren't 100% perfect. So in the Declaration of Independence, we talk about how, all men are created equal, yet we still have slavery. And in the French Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, it talks about how all men could vote and how all men could get an education, but they don't talk about women's rights. And in Simón Bolívar's famous letter called the Jamaica Letter, where he makes this passionate argument for independence, for revolution, against the Spanish officials, against the Peninsulares, it's great and it's motivational, but Bolívar and his Creole, supporters tried to maintain all the power for themselves, right, keeping it from the peasants, from the rural people. So, yes, the Enlightenment definitely inspired the revolution, and yes, the revolutions brought a lot of those Enlightenment ideas to practice, but they were still flawed. There were still limitations. Women, slaves, serfs, poor people, right? They're the ones who barely gained anything. All right, so here we see some of the famous writings, some of the famous words, some of those inspirational documents during this era of the Enlightenment. All right, and these are the type of documents you might expect you could get a DBQ out of, or maybe a multiple choice question explaining or asking questions about these documents. And again, keep in mind that women won't get the right to vote until the 20th century. Serfdom isn't going to be abolished until the mid-1800s, and slavery will be abolished, but it will take a longer time, especially in Brazil, 1888, and here in the United States, it only is established or is only abolished after a bloody civil war. One last thing to talk about is, of course, is slave resistance. Never doubt that slaves did resist, because they did all the time. But most of the slave rebellions, of course, or all the slave rebellions, ended in failure because the imperial powers, the slave owners, always had an upper hand. Many times these slaves will run away into the jungles, into the forests, into the rural areas of a country to create something called the maroon societies, to kind of like live in more isolated and therefore in some form of freedom. Now, of course, the exception to the rule when it comes to the unsuccessful series of slave rebellions is going to be the Haitian Revolution. It is going to be the one and only slave rebellion that is going to succeed in overthrowing the slave owners and abolishing slavery and creating a completely free country of Haiti. And here we see some images of those slave rebellions. And you can imagine white people, slave owners, women, children, old people, didn't really matter to the slaves. All of them fell victim to a slave rebellion. A few things more to talk about. Increasing questions about political authority. So we see that there is, as imperialism spreads and becomes more common, we're going to see anti-colonial, anti-imperialist movements. Two famous examples includes the Sepoy Rebellion or the Sepoy Mutiny, and this is when those Indian soldiers rose up against the British authorities, tried to kick out the British, but were unsuccessful, and this led to further British control of India. Same thing is going to happen in China, how the Boxer Rebellion is going to try to kick out the foreigners and kick out the Qin dynasty because they were working with the foreigners, but they were unsuccessful as well. So again, as one country or some countries, the imperial countries, gain more and more power and control over the colonies, those colonies are going to rebel as well. Other rebellions sometimes were influenced by religion. So, for example, remember the Taiping Rebellion, which was this massive, destructive 10-year rebellion against the Qin dynasty. The guy who led it was this kind of radical Christian guy who claimed to be the brother of Jesus. So sometimes we see the religion kind of take a greater hold or push people to rebel. We see a similar movement in the United States, something called the Ghost Dance, where different Native American tribes will have these huge ceremonies, huge rituals, where they thought that the spirits of their ancestors can come in and help them and protect them fight against the expansion of the United States. And they believe that the spirits can protect them from bullets. So they're going to battle and run into gunfire, thinking that their ancestor spirits can protect them somehow. And of course, that didn't come true. Other examples of these religious rebellions include the Xhosa cattle killing. Some of you remember this one, how the people of South Africa started killing their cattle, thinking that their ancestor spirits were going to come back to help them defeat the British colonizers, the British settlers, and that also didn't really happen. Now, many times countries are going to force to reform as a response to rebellion or as a response to imperial expansion. So, for example, the Ottomans, after they lose numerous wars and lose a lot of territory, the Ottomans are going to undergo the Tanzimat reforms or the Tanzimat movement in an attempt to improve things, in an attempt to industrialize, in an attempt to modernize, but they're not going to be too successful. The Qin dynasty in China is going to try to also industrialize and modernize during the self-strengthening movement, but that again will not be successful either. So reforms are going to happen as a response to external forces, right? As the Europeans and the Westerners are going to put more and more pressure on Turkey and on China, we're going to see that they're going to try to reform, but again, very limited success. In addition to all these revolutions, the Atlantic revolutions, we also see movements towards more philosophical, more economic changes. And these new ideas like socialism and Marxism, right, trying to change the economic systems of capitalism, replace it with a more egalitarian, equal system that Marxism or communism or socialism try to create, right, where there's going to be more economic equality. We also see the rise of liberalism amongst the Western powers. There's ideas that the government should have very limited impact on people's daily lives, that people should have the maximum number of rights, pay the least amount of taxes and more individual freedom and less power to the government, more power to the people. So again, these new ideologies, right, looking at how to change the economy, how to change the government, how to restrict the power of the government in one way or another, or restrict the power of the wealthy over the poor, in the case of Marxism, those are going to increase in popularity because, again, the capitalist system and most of the countries are still monarchies and still pretty much absolute monarchies. So we're going to see quite a lot of political reforms or political anger against these systems, and attempts to change them are going to start in the 1800s. But these Marxist communist revolutions, again, are going to come to reality in the 20th century. All right, few last things here. Women, of course, are going to begin the feminist movement. Remember, it is simply to define feminism. It is quite simply to say that there shouldn't be any discrimination based on gender, that women and men should have the same equal rights. It doesn't mean that women should have more rights. It simply means that they should have the same. And women, of course, began demanding these rights throughout this time period, late 1700s and all over the 1800s. Some of the first women feminist writers include a British woman called Mary Wollstonecraft, and she wrote in 1792 talking about the rights that women should have. A more famous example was Olympe de Gouges. She was a French philosopher, French writer during the Enlightenment, during the French Revolution. And her document, the Declaration of the Rights of Women and the Female Citizen, was a direct attack on the revolutionary document, the French Revolution document, about the rights of the male citizen. And of course, she argued that women should have the same rights, and eventually those radical, crazy beliefs ended killing her because they got her on the guillotine. Here in the United States, the feminist movement, we tend to mark the beginning of it in a convention that was held in New York State, in Seneca Falls. And this was numerous groups, women's groups, got together and started saying that from now on that they're going to work to fight for women's suffrage. Also, you should know that many of these suffrage movement supporters were also supporters of the abolition movement, right? Trying to end slavery. So keep in mind that even though these women begin the struggle, begin the fight for universal suffrage, for more equality, they begin during this time period, but we won't see much improvement until the 20th century. All right, so that's it for the 4th video. Thanks for paying attention. And Caroline ruined everything.